Hi, our topic for today is science education in the Philippines. Now, let's start. Science education in the Philippines. About science education in the Philippines. In the Philippines, the secondary science education curriculum has been reformed towards providing greater opportunities for students to realize that principles studied in class are relevant to everyday life. Under the theme, Science and Technology, the proposed curriculum integrates local and relevant technologies and their environmental impact with science concepts. Value formation in the context of scientific and technological activities is included whenever appropriate. The proposed curriculum can be summarized as learner to the power of based, multidisciplinary to some extent, and relevant to national developmental goals. It is flexible to suit the separate needs of the college to the power of bound and the students who would drop out of secondary schools in different communities. The curriculum includes the core textbook, which introduces the basic concepts and its relevant applications, and supplementary materials, both theoretical and applied. Implications for educational practice of the science of learning and development. The science framework for Philippine basic education to the power of contains resources that will help curriculum developers, teachers, school administrators and policy makers to design and implement science curricula that empower students to learn to the power of and cause them to better understand and use science in their everyday life. The strategies consider only grades 1-10 inches. However, because of the progressive nature of the concepts, curriculum development could easily be extended to cover K-12. Next is the importance of the school science education. Science is useful because of its links to technology and industry, which, from a national perspective, are areas of high priority for development. Science provides ways of making sense of the world systematically. It develops students' scientific inquiry skills, values and attitudes, such as objectivity, curiosity, and honesty and habits of mind including critical thinking. All these are useful to the individual student for his own personal development, future career, and life in general. These skills, values, attitudes, and dispositions are likewise useful to the community that an individual student belongs to, and are further useful to the country that he lives in. The learning of science is also important for the nation's cultural development and preservation of its cultural identity. Science is most useful to a nation when it is utilized to solve its own problems and challenges, keeping a nation's cultural uniqueness and peculiarities intact. Thus in many countries, science teaching and learning is linked with culture. The challenges in science education, Philippines context. Some Filipino students have gained recognition for their high level of accomplishments in the International Science and Engineering Fair, Robotics Competition, and Physics Olympiad, to name a few. There are also reports of students in far-flung rural schools scoring much higher than the international mean in the case of the third trends in international mathematics and science study, TIMSS, or have gone beyond the 75% mastery level in the case of the National Achievement Test, NAT. Many educators and graduate student researchers have identified several factors behind the low performance in science of Filipino students. These are quality of teachers, the teaching learning process, the school curriculum, instructional materials, and administrative support. Dustsei, 2006. Critical thinking. Development of inquiry skills contribute towards development of critical thinking in learners. Critical thinking skills are not taught directly. They are developed through inquiry activities that students engage in and through their attempts to explain the outcomes of their investigations using evidence and logical argument. When making comparisons, they learn to recognize when a comparison might be unfair because the conditions were not kept the same. Curiosity. School should be a place where students are encouraged to be curious. A curious person is someone who desires to know or to learn. How do clouds form? What makes this toy run? But most people express their curiosity merely by posing a question. Oftentimes there is little effort to search for the answer. Curiosity must lead to action. To express wonderment is simply the first step. One must also possess an active desire to explore and tinker, to investigate and learn from the results. Next, the concept of science education. Science education focuses on teaching, learning, and understanding science. Teaching science involves developing ways on how to effectively teach science. This means exploring pedagogical theories and models in helping teachers teach scientific concepts and processes effectively. Learning science includes both pedagogy and the most interesting aspect, which is helping students understand and love science. Understanding science implies developing and applying science process skills and using science literacy in understanding the natural world and activities in everyday life. Jetting deeper into the discourse of science education, John Dewey, 2001, stressed the importance of utilizing the natural environment to teach students. Accordingly, nature must indeed furnish its physical stimuli to provide a wealth of meaning through social activities and thinking. It is not surprising therefore that science education is important. pH lowest among 58 countries in math, science, global assessment. The Trends in International Mathematics and Science Study 2019 shows the Philippines scored significantly lower than any other country that participated in Grade 4 math and science assessments. Filipino students lagged behind other countries in the International Assessment for Mathematics and Science for Grade 4, the Trends in International Mathematics and Science Study 2019, TIMSS, revealed on Tuesday, December 8. The Philippines only scored 297 in mathematics and 249 in science, which are significantly lower to the power of than any other participating country. The country also scored the lowest among all 58 participating countries for both tests. Meanwhile, Singapore topped both assessments in Grade 4 Mathematics and Science, 625 and 595, respectively. It also has the highest scores for Grade 8 in the same subjects, 616, Mathematics, and 608, Science. The Philippines only participated in the Grade 4 assessment for this cycle. TIMSS is an assessment given to grades 4 and 8 students. TIMSS set 4 international benchmarks along a scale to determine students' competence. Advanced International Benchmark, 625, High International Benchmark, 550, Intermediate International Benchmark, 475, and Low International Benchmark, 400. In mathematics, only 19% of Filipino students were on the low benchmark, which means that they had some basic mathematical knowledge, while 81% did not even reach this level. Meanwhile, Singapore topped both assessments in Grade 4 Mathematics and Science, 625 and 595, respectively. It also has the highest scores for Grade 8 in the same subjects, 616, Mathematics, and 608, Science. The Philippines only participated in the Grade 4 assessment for this cycle. TIMSS is an assessment given to grades 4 and 8 students. TIMSS set 4 international benchmarks along a scale to determine students' competence. Advanced International Benchmark, 625, High International Benchmark, 550, Intermediate International Benchmark, 475, and Low International Benchmark, 400. In mathematics, only 19% of Filipino students were on the low benchmark, which means that they had some basic mathematical knowledge, while 81% did not even reach this level. They can add, subtract, multiply, and divide 1 and 2-digit whole numbers. They can solve simple word problems. They have some knowledge of simple fractions and common geometric shapes. Students can read and complete simple bar graphs and tables. The study said to the power of they can add, subtract, multiply, and divide 1 and 2-digit whole numbers. They can solve simple word problems. They have some knowledge of simple fractions and common geometric shapes. Students can read and complete simple bar graphs and tables, the study said. As for science, 13% of Filipino students were also on the low benchmark, which means they had limited understanding of scientific concepts and limited knowledge of foundational science facts, while 87% did not even reach this level. Based in Boston College S. Lynch School of Education and Human Development, the International Association for the Evaluation of Educational Achievements, IEA, TIMSS conducts regular international comparative assessments of student achievements in mathematics and science in more than 60 countries. IEA has been conducting these studies since 1959. Better ranking. In a press briefing on November 26, the Department of Education, DepEd, announced that the Philippines will join the 2022 PISA, where it aims to improve on its dismal past performance. Read, Philippines eyes better ranking in 2022 International Student Assessment Program. Education Secretary Leonor Briones hopes that the country will improve its performance in the 2022 PISA, the second time that the Philippines will join the International Student Assessment. Read, Analysis, Dismal PISA Rankings. A wake-up call for Filipinos. Senator Win Gatchalian, however, said in a statement on Saturday, December 12, that the results of the TIMSS study pointed to a major crisis in the country's basic education system that will not be resolved by business as usual. This is a major crisis. The country has been participating in global assessments as an additional tool to measure the effectiveness of the basic education curriculum. The dismal result for the third time is so depressing and should serve as a wake-up call, said Gatchalian, chairman of the Senate Committee on Basic Education, Arts and Culture. Why this matters? Due to the continuing coronavirus pandemic, schools in the country shifted to distance learning, a mix of online classes and printed learning module, following President Rodrigo Duterte's directive to suspend face-to-face classes until a COVID-19 vaccine becomes available. Under the distance learning system, parents have an active role in guiding their children through modular lessons, which posed a problem for students who do not have anyone to facilitate learning at home, or whose parents are not capable of guiding them due to lack of knowledge. Read, parents bear the brunt of distance learning as classes shift online. The pandemic has exposed the gaps in the Philippine education system evident in erroneous learning modules for distance learning. Listen, podcast, ang mga mailing impormasyon sa DepEd distance learning materials. Mishaps such as to the power of grammar errors, wrong math equation, and modules depicting gender stereotypes alarmed the public as they expressed concerns over the quality of education of over 24 million students during the pandemic. The advantages and disadvantages of science education in the Philippines. Let's start with advantages. We have the essence of science education. The essence of science education is involvement and understanding of the process of science. Learning science should start with hands-on experiences that the student is familiar with and not with abstract definitions about what science is. Currently, there is an urgent need to innovate and introduce tools and methods for teaching science. In the 21st century education setting, students should use science for themselves, be able to observe, measure, compare, describe and evaluate by themselves learning related to the core subject. The current methods of teaching science in schools and provide an alternative, innovative approaches for teaching science. These strategies involve new techniques of teaching science, mainly blackboard teaching and digital simulation classes which cater to the basic essence of science learning, that is understanding the process of science through experiences. Traditional techniques of teaching are proven and effective in most scenarios so far, but the study of science can be made more interesting for the students and thus help in their better understanding of science. Introducing various methods, like the use of technology, can make science attractive, interesting and thus gain the attention of the students and help create a better scientific environment in schools. We have benefits of science education. Number 1. Science enhances critical thinking. Scientific concepts typically begin with an idea followed by an experiment to substantiate that idea through technical methods and analysis. The scientific method dictates a logical way of approaching unfamiliar topics, ensuring students can learn how to relate theoretical and practical work. Learning to find the relationship between theories and empirical evidence holds cognitive benefits, which confer to other subjects and areas of life. Like gas to a stove, science is the fuel that accelerates young minds into peak performance. On the flip side, deficiencies in critical thinking in many parts of the community can be attributed to a lack of the accumulated practice that comes with time spent on science studies. 2. Science knowledge cultivates a passion for learning. The thrill of uncovering why the sun sets in the east, why the sky is blue, how fish breathe in water and other remarkable everyday scenarios is naturally fascinating. Science feeds the natural curiosity that makes learners tick and encourages them to explore the mysteries observable everywhere. A hands-on approach also appeals to many. The possibility of demonstrating scientific concepts firsthand builds an appetite for learning. 3. Science uplifts many disciplines. For one to understand science, you need a solid understanding of other essential areas of study. For instance, knowledge of mathematical concepts is a fundamental prerequisite that comes in handy for qualitative and quantitative analysis. Scientific method is based on technical skills, such as the careful observation of the world around us and the ability to conduct highly controlled experiments. The presentation of results in science reporting teaches the values of objectivity and thoroughness. Getting good at science positions a student to do well in life. They can quickly turn their hand to other fields of study or work using core science-related competencies. Next, Science holds the key to the future. It's hard to think of an aspect of life that doesn't lean on science to some extent. It's an integral part of various fields, from agriculture to high-tech and everything in between. The next generation deserves a strong science education to help prepare them for whatever may lie ahead. For example, declining rates of smoking take-up appear due, in part, to science-based intervention programs in schools. Science is useful for demonstrating to students the environmental and medical effects of pollutants, including tobacco smoke, and the risks of substance addiction. Interactive learning has been the most statistically convincing teaching method in terms of producing observable long-term benefits. In a world where new scientific advancements crop up seemingly by the hour, a background in science ensures students aren't left behind by the ever-shifting tides of the technological wave. A strong science foundation teaches learners to be self-sufficient in an environment where constant change is the only constant. And lastly, career opportunities flow from science skills. Ultimately, one of the primary reasons children go to school is to get a job, and a good one at that. Through the enhancement of logic and math-based skills, children with a science background have an enormous opportunity before them. Opportunities from learning science encompass professions both within scientific fields and outside of science, extending to fields such as business, engineering, information technology and healthcare. Science is continuously on an upward, expansionary trend. The economy may or may not take a hit in the future, but you can never say the same about science. Our understanding of the world through science consistently takes steps forward and rarely back. With scientific solutions and innovations surfacing at an accelerating rate, science never loses its daily relevance. Next we have disadvantages. First, shortage of teachers. Numerous factors can be attributed to the current predicament faced by the country. First and foremost would be the shortage of science and math teachers in the country. In 2016, DepEd Secretary Leonor Briones stressed the need to hire more teachers with the implementation of the K-12 programs, which created 36,641 free teaching posts. The government tried to make ends meet for this shortage by having DepEd offer teaching posts with above entry-level salary grades to science and technology graduates under the junior-level science scholarships of the Department of Science and Technology Science Education Institute. The scholar graduates of the program would also receive a teacher training program for them to qualify for the licensure examination for teachers, LET. Qualifying graduates from the scholarship would be given the position of special science teacher with a starting salary grade of 13. DepEd also called for graduates of science, math, or engineering courses without LET certification, as well TESTA accredited technical vocational graduates with expertise in specific learning areas, to apply as part-time teachers for the K-12 senior high school pro. Second, shortage of classrooms. Shortage of classrooms for DepEd schools is also an issue. With the implementation of the K-12 program, Benji Valbuena, National Chair of the Alliance of Concerned Teachers Philippines, ACT Philippines, estimated the classroom shortage in the country to be 113,995 as of 2017. By June 2017, Education Undersecretary Jesus Mateo announced that 50,000 of the needed 113,000 classrooms had already been completed and are pending use. The Undersecretary stressed the objective of the government to create more classrooms to meet lower class size, which leads to conducive learning. Third, shortage of laboratories. Aside from the obvious lack of classrooms, there is also a lack of science laboratories to facilitate science learning and the application of its concepts to students. In 2014, DepEd reported a shortage of science laboratories in Regions 3, 4A, 10, 11, and 13, with an average of only 1 in 10 schools having their laboratory. In the National Capital Region, the ratio improved with 3 laboratories for every 10 schools. However, the findings showed that the rest of the regions did not have any science laboratories. This problem prompted researchers from Diliman and Los Baños of the University of the Philippines to develop a versatile instrumentation system for science education and research, VISR. This instrumentation system includes hardware, software, sensors, and experiment modules for various science subjects. The device's hardware component includes multi-channel plug-and-play analog and digital sensors that run on a microcontroller. The microcontroller pulls all the information and connects such hardware to the device's modules, which include experiments in biology, chemistry, physics, and engineering. Next, quality of learning materials. DepEd also faces a challenge in terms of the quality of its textbooks. Many teachers have reported that the books are obsolete and flooded with errors. In Torrijos, Marinduque, the situation of sick books to the power of is nothing new. Teachers from that municipality are well acquainted with the circulation of such textbooks. Draft copy of the 2014 Grade 9 Science Learners material. These errors were already reported to improve the final version. And DepEd also faces a challenge in terms of the quality of its textbooks. Many teachers have reported that the books are obsolete and flooded with errors. In Torrijos, Marinduque, the situation of sick books to the power of is nothing new. Teachers from that municipality are well acquainted with the circulation of such textbooks. They even provided a copy of an English book for children inundated with marks from highlighter pens showing typographical, grammatical, factual, and conceptual errors. Antonio Calipjogo, a critic of the circulating DepEd textbooks, identified 1,300 to the power of in a grade 10 English learning book. An anonymous teacher also pointed out numerous errors in her draft copy of the 2014 Grade 9 Science Learners material. These errors were already reported to improve the final version of the material. A long journey for science in the Philippines. Providing competent science education facilitates students to be curious at a young age. It also cultivates their set of beliefs, based on the answers to their questions. Science pushes for the concept of objectivity, as opposed to relying solely on emotions that might hinder proper decision-making. Instead of arguing based on gut feel or emotions alone, we present data and facts. At the same time, we remain open-minded about the perspectives of other people. The values of objectivity and open-mindedness, in turn, enable and encourage people to listen to each other. The general perception of science in the Philippines. The aforementioned predicaments of Philippine education severely limit how most the public schools can teach science to their students. The lack of classrooms limits the conduciveness of lectures to students. Public schools that lack classrooms oftentimes compensate by holding classes at their multipurpose gymnasiums, with their makeshift classrooms separated only by curtains. Students there can hear the chatter all over the place, and end up listening not only to their teacher's lecture, but also to the lecture from the adjacent classroom. Textbooks and learning materials are also critical. If they are bland and unengaging, how can one expect students to even flip through their pages with interest? The lack of laboratories also damages the quality of education, limiting teachers to lectures and reporting activities for students instead of lab experiments that show how the concepts work in real life. Filipino students are bombarded with theories and terminologies, which are not necessarily the things that make science exciting. Scientists do not memorize and regurgitate information. They ask questions, predict outcomes, and actually perform experiments. With these limitations in science teaching, one cannot help but wonder how our countrymen perceive science. The average Filipino who does not work in a science-related industry has likely never related the concept to his or her everyday life. The word science itself seems distant and elusive, only being applied to people who spend most of their days in the lab or in the classroom. When you hear the word science, what comes to mind? Probably, it's a bunch of concepts from biology such as evolution, or the oft-repeated statement that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. As far as chemistry goes, you might remember mixtures, compounds, and elements. In terms of physics, you would probably just imagine blackboard full of equations and symbols, with Albert Einstein patiently and painstakingly trying to make you understand them. How is the science education in the Philippines? Gone were the days that we just had general science in Science 7, biology in Science 8, chemistry in Science 8 and physics in Science 10. As we adopt the K-12 curriculum, changes were made. As mandated in the Republic Act No. 10,533, also known as Enhanced Basic Education Act of 2013, that private and public schools to implement spiral progression approach to solve the congestion of Philippine basic education curriculum. Hence, in new secondary science K-12 curriculum, the students are exposed to spiral progression approach, wherein the four areas, namely earth science, biology, chemistry and physics, are being taught every grading period. Sanchez, 2014. Science teachers should be equipped with the 4 subject areas along this line. The science education in the country is faced with many constraints such as the shortage of qualified science teachers, lack of quality textbooks, inadequate instructional materials and equipment, large classes, and lack of support from administrators. In addition, it was found that the lack of instructional materials and equipment in school has been used to account for the poor performance of students' SEI Dust and Up NISM, 2011. At present, DepEd finds solutions regarding these matters. Numerous laboratory tools and equipment are being distributed in selected public senior high schools throughout the country from 2017 until present. This package had laboratory tables and stools to go with. Thus, public senior high schools with junior high schools in their campus may both use the said laboratory tools and equipment. Furthermore, DepEd had distributed television sets and computer packages as well to aid the teachers in their instructional materials. The computers contained the Learning Resources Management and Development System, LRMDS, of the Department of Education, DepEd, which provides teaching and learning resources aligned to the K-12 curriculum. But then until this time, most learners' materials textbooks in science are not yet available for the students, especially in the science core subjects of the senior HS. I guess that's why teachers are exposed to various trainings and seminars to be able to teach well despite the lacking textbooks. That's all. Thank you. Have a nice day.